Welcome to Inside the Issues. I am Amrit Singh. In how many ways can we say that it's tough times financially for the city of Los Angeles? The LA fires have brought some urgency to the conversation, and this month, LA City Controller Kenneth Mejia released his revenue forecast report, and it's another way to say tough times. The controller is projecting a budget deficit for the second year in a row. Not great timing to be in financial straits with the World Cup and the Olympics on the horizon, and the need to rebuild after the Palisades fire, a very urgent need at that. So what's the big number of projected shortfall? That number you see right there in the screen, estimated deficit of $140 million. This is for the current fiscal year, which ends in June. A lot of reasons for that, but you're better hearing it directly from the city controller. And so we are lucky to be joined right now in studio by LA City Controller Kenneth Mejia. Kenneth, welcome back to Inside the Issues. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
I think we're doing the hard work of this revenue forecast that you do every year. And I mean, $140 million, people understand it's tough times for this city. But talk about that number, how you came to it, and why we're losing this money in the future.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, that $140 million is a revenue shortfall in general fund revenues compared to what we budgeted for. And about $92 million of that shortfall relates to sales and business tax. So whether it's the increased prices, inflationary pressures, the uncertainty of the new administration, whether that's on tariffs, on immigration, there's a lot of a dampened side effect that we're seeing on consumer confidence. And so, $140 million is just on the revenue side, but we're also estimating, and the CEO's office has estimated that the city is going to go over budget on spending by $300 million. So those are both parts of the equation you have to add together, and that's how you get your real deficit.
Last time the city administrative officer projected a sort of revenue shortfall, as you're saying now, it's $300 million, it was $358 million. And we dipped into the city's general fund to some degree, and we froze some hiring, and we froze some city services. When you talk about the shortfall, what do you see as available for some of the remedies for this? A city general fund, for instance, and what else do you suggest?
So it's actually the reserve fund, which is also funded by the general fund. But the reserve fund is your emergency piggy bank, your rainy day fund. So the city actually just a year and a half ago had $648 million. If all the recommendations go through on tapping the reserve fund again, we'll be around $260 million. So you can just see how much we've tapped. What the city can also do when they sort of stop tapping it is they can stop spending, such as a hiring freeze. The city has been in one since January 2024, and then eventually they eliminated 1,700 positions to get that money that was saved for them. So those are just some of the things that the city's doing, and obviously a lot of Angelenos are feeling the effects of that because city services are not increasing, or they're not at the bare minimum either.
We talk about property taxes in your revenue forecast, and they continue to increase, but not at the rate they usually do. Is that right?
Right. So it's going up about 2 to 3% each year, and so especially with what's happening with the Palisades fire and all that, we can expect a small hit in terms of the overall city because of that.
So, and when we talk about that general fund, that reserve fund, as you say, when it dips below a certain percentage, and I get this from your forecast, that's 2.75% threshold, it triggers something new for the city council to consider, which is an economic urgent crisis. Is that the terminology?
Correct. So the city's policy is to keep it above 5%. We're below 5% right now, but if it dips below 2.75%, that means that anytime the city wants to use the reserve fund again, it has to get a 2/3 vote to pass if they want to tap into it.
Kenneth, I'm not getting a lot of confidence from this. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it feels like from all different sides, as we're sketching out the property tax, things with the administration, uncertainty, certainly funds potentially not coming to the city in the way that they have in the past, potentially from the federal government. Where do we go from here? I mean, we talk about the hiring and the general fund. What else can happen? What else do you recommend?
Right. So when I think about the city's finances, I think about it from a revenue and a spending side. So on the revenue side, 3 big areas are either you raise fees, you raise taxes, or you get some sort of grants or subsidies by the government, which we're uncertain about. Right. We also are looking at different fees. Sewage fees are getting increased as well. When it comes to taxes, that's something that's very sensitive to Angelenos if they even want to raise anymore. So that's on the revenue side. When it comes to the spending side, we are overspending over budget, especially coming from our massive liability payouts. So we're estimated to spend about $320 million on liabilities for the city, and that's really putting a drainage on our city's general fund.
Let's talk about how the fires impact all of this too. I mean, you mentioned it a bit, but to some degree, potentially property tax as well, and also the different services. There's also a conversation on LAFD needing more money. How do you see the fires impacting all this?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, the fires, the estimated damage to City of LA government property in response is about $282 million. We're expecting some hits on property taxes, about $11 million from the county auditor's assessment for a full year, some hits to business and sales tax as well. But that's something that we are touching on, and we'll provide updates. But in terms of, you know, the future on this, you know, this is a great opportunity for the city to properly fund, you know, the fire department, to get them the resources they need so that if it happens again, they do have those mechanics who were restored. They do have the accountants that they need to do payroll to pay their firefighters. So, you know, I think this is a learning lesson for the city.
It's a lot about allocating funds, because as you're saying, there was an allocated amount budget and the revenues are not going to quite meet that. We have some ways to get some money out from this reserve fund, but we have to look into the future in a way, as you say, to fund the resources differently. And that, of course, it comes down to the mayor's budget, and it comes down to city council. You send this letter to the mayor, to city council. What have you heard in response?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard for the first time since I've been in, this is my third year here, we're finally hearing agreement, because before, when we used to do this revenue forecast, the city would end up budgeting a higher revenue amount. And that's bad because the city tries to spend towards that amount. And when they see that the money's not there, they end up going to these hiring freezes, these cuts, which are happening. But this year, the CEO's office actually agreed with our revenue shortfall for this fiscal year, and then also for next fiscal year.
And you've also proposed some structural changes that could help on the revenue side, and that those include an interesting idea when it comes to taxes. Obviously, we have a sales tax, but talk about it in terms of services.
Right, so we're one of the states that don't apply a sales tax to services, right? It's only mainly to things we buy, all right? And so that would be another form of generation of sales revenue. So that's something that, you know, but it's a sensitive issue.
Yeah, everyone's
right?
loving hearing that. They're like, oh, cool, taxes on my haircuts.
It's a sensitive issue. But I think the big thing is Angelenos want more transparency on where their tax dollars are going.
Right.
You know, whether they're spending on homelessness, housing, policing, everything.
And can we speak about that? The participatory budget is another sort of structural reform that you have advocated for, and that would provide transparency. It would actually provide participation for people. But it sounds, and people can imagine, the city council meetings where there's debate over what's happening from the city council, from a budget standpoint, also people participating, it sounds like it could be chaotic and a lot of logistics. I mean, how would that look?
Yeah, so basically, actually, what we're doing, our office, is we're building a website where we're inputting the actual city budget, and Angelenos can go and increase or decrease their budget that they want, whether it's for us at a high level for a department or at the programmatic level by department. So, you know, we have the technology. It's a matter of, do we want to actually get input from Angelenos in such an easy manner and decide where do they want their money spent?
It sounds like it's an interesting tool and an innovative way to think about the city's finances, what is historically very opaque and at this moment so important, especially after the fires. People are thinking about it. So on their website, on your website, they can find that.
Yeah, when we launch it, we'll make sure to send it to everyone.
It's on its way. Okay, good. We'll look forward to that. So another thing before I let you go is this conversation, this independent audit commissioned by federal Judge David O. Carter about homeless spending, talking about LAHSA spending, talking about $2 billion that essentially unaccounted for in some ways in terms of spending and the tracking of it. What's your take on that? Because you've also audited around homelessness as well.
Sure. Our office has actually done 2 audits around homelessness since we've taken office, and similar results. Our audits were actually cited multiple times in this latest assessment that was released last week. But, you know, talking as a city controller, when it comes to homelessness spending, especially when we pay homelessness agencies like LAHSA, right, it is very difficult to track where that money is going in terms of, we know we're paying a service provider, but what did we get for that? Where's the service provider invoice that we even have? And that's something that we are working on getting and trying to figure out with the homelessness agency, so that way people can have that transparency. Because I think the big issue, like I said, is people are not getting that transparency, or they're not getting it in a way that's digestible or accessible.
There's a lot of things happening with LAHSA right now, a lot of reporting around LAHSA, a lot of conversation on the way LAHSA, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, allocates these funds to these vendors. And David O. Carter pointing a finger to some degree to LAHSA to understand better. We've heard from LA County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath saying that the county should sort of remove itself from LAHSA and really bring homeless service authorities under its roof. Mayor Bass has pushed back on that. Given what we're seeing with LAHSA, do you have a take on what should happen?
You know, my office for the first time did an analysis on how much money we spent last fiscal year. We budgeted $1.3 billion and we estimated that over $500 million wasn't spent. And one of the reasons why it's so difficult and what you're seeing from the county or other agencies is they want to have better tracking of those dollars. And the reason why it's so difficult in the city is because there's no one central department for homelessness. Right now, homelessness is spread across so many different departments and agencies. So when an individual department spends, it's so easy to track what that department's doing.
Right.
When it comes to homelessness, it's so spread across. In addition, like I said before too, when we're trying to find what we got for, what we paid for, when we pay the homelessness agencies, that's very difficult to reconcile or at least get support for on what we're paying for.
Yeah, so LAHSA's joint city-county, as you say, it creates some logistics. So do you think that the city and the county should start allocating them separately?
You know, that's up to city council and the mayor on what they want to do.
Yeah.
For what I want to do in my role is to make sure that every dollar that's spent can be accounted for.
Yeah.
And that's something that my office has tried to do. We tried to look at invoices at a more detailed level on where these funds go. We've been, met with some pushback at times, and so it's very difficult when you're trying to provide more transparency.
Well, it's important to bring transparency to whatever degree possible. And on March 27th, Judge David O'Carter has summoned a hearing, has requested your presence and other city officials. We hope to speak to you on the other side of that about this issue and so much more. It's just great to have you talk about all this stuff. Thank you so much, Kenneth.
Sure, you got it. Thank you.
Great to have you. Really appreciate it. Kenneth Mejia, City Controller of Los Angeles, talking again about what's happening with some tough financial times for LA City, from the services revenues, spending and budget and beyond, and a little bit of transparency, which we appreciate here at ITI. More coming up. Stay with us. All eyes are now on the Senate in the debate to keep the federal government funded beyond Friday night. And the biggest question is whether enough Senate Democrats will side with Republicans to pass a stopgap measure to avoid a partial government shutdown. Evan Kosloff takes us into it from Capitol Hill.
Bill is passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
The Republican-backed spending bill cleared its first hurdle Tuesday night, passing in the House in a near party-line vote with the support of just one Democrat. But this bill will need a lot more buy-in from Democrats to clear the Senate.
I am unwilling to vote to shut the government down.
Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was the first Democrat senator to support the stopgap funding measure. To pass, at least 7 other Democrats would need to join him.
It wasn't that long ago that we were scolding that the Republicans are threatening to shut the government down.
The measure, known as a continuing resolution or CR, would keep federal agencies funded for 6 more months, preventing a partial shutdown on Friday night. Democrats have pushed back on the short-term CR because they argue it would do nothing to stop the sweeping spending and staffing cuts that the president and his ally Elon Musk are making across the government, most recently at the Department of Education.
It's basically a dirty deal.
The bill presents Democrats with a painful choice. Voting it down would shut down the government, but they argue that letting it pass would enable the president and Musk to continue slashing federal programs.
I don't think CRs are a good option, and government shutdowns are not a good option.
Democrats also object to a provision that would force the District of Columbia to cut $1.1 billion from its local budget.
DC cannot be the pawn. You can't hurt district children, hurt district taxpayers, and say, oh, well, we're just passing the budget.
Our caucus is unified.
Now, we also heard from the Senate's top Democrat, Chuck Schumer, late Wednesday, who said there are not enough Democratic yes votes in the chamber to pass the spending plan. That could mean a potential shutdown Friday night. Schumer called on Republicans to support a 30-day spending extension to give the two parties time to reach a compromise. Reporting here on Capitol Hill, Evan Kosloff, Spectrum News.
We'll continue to watch Washington, D.C. for some word on that CR. Thank you, Evan Kosloff. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency will close all offices in its Environmental Justice Division as part of the Trump administration's continued reorganizing of the federal government. That's according to a memo from EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. The memo says the closures are in response to President Trump's orders ending federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Another federal office undergoing some drastic changes under the Trump administration is the U.S. Department of Education. Mass layoffs and buyouts there have left millions of students, parents, teachers, and more with a lot of questions about what happens next. Nikki Kay has a look at the impact on a more local level.
The plan for Carmen Mejia has been to study communication at Santa Monica College and transfer to Loyola Marymount University. But on Wednesday, she was processing news unsure if it would impact her future. The U.S. Department of Education laid off half of its workforce.
I think that there's a lack of knowledge in regards to the fact that I don't know if a lot of students even know that. I didn't.
Her peer and fellow student Roxanne Caswell is only thinking of greater implications.
I think it's really disheartening. I think it's really upsetting. It's really frustrating. I think education should get more funding, not less.
Jen Curtis has been helping guide students through the college admissions process for 17 years.
I think that we are in a really fluid situation. As I said, as a profession, there certainly is concern.
She says only time will tell what these layoffs might mean for the state of federal student aid.
Reality is, at this point, we don't know. So the DOE, the main task of the DOE is not to determine curriculum. That's something that is at the state or local level. It's really an entity that is helping people gain access and equity. And part of that is its federal student aid office. That is an office that plays a crucial role in putting out the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid.
As someone who says her job is to demystify the college application process, she feels there's a lot of uncertainty moving forward.
And they dole out about north of $120 billion in grants and work study and loan funds. At this point, we don't know, if the DOE is abolished. We are not sure what will happen.
Carmen is also unsure what it might mean for the future of the Department of Education, but she can already anticipate the strain of a reduced workforce in the federal agency that handles financial aid for college tuition.
And as a student, that can only make me think that everything's just going to get delayed. So, that delays looking for jobs, that delays scholarships, because if you don't know what type of funding you're going to receive, how are you supposed to know what other external resources you've got to look for?
These layoffs leaving a cloud of doubt in a process meant to ensure students that their futures are bright.
Yeah, without knowing what kind of funding you'll have, it's hard to know what to do. That's what LA City is talking about as well. And also one industry is worrying about that with tariffs. We'll tell you about that when we come back. Stay with us. Pour one out for alcohol production. It's one of many American industries feeling some of those reciprocal tariffs from Canada and Mexico. That includes the bourbon industry and more broadly the state of Kentucky, which is responsible for 95% of the entire world's bourbon production. Makes sense. Bourbon is a Kentucky product. In some cases, bottles of bourbon have been pulled from store shelves completely. Erin Kelly has more.
The European Union is striking back, announcing on Wednesday what it calls strong but proportionate countermeasures in response to President Donald Trump's tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum to the U.S. And once again, Kentucky bourbon is caught in the crossfire.
Worst case scenario, worst case scenario.
In 2018, the EU placed a 25% retaliatory tariff on American whiskey in response to President Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States says that caused whiskey exports to the EU to plunge 20% from $552 million in 2018 to about $440 million in 2021. After the U.S. and EU agreed to a truce in their trade war, exports rebounded to $705 million in 2023. The council says in response to President Trump's new tariffs, the EU's previously suspended tariff on American whiskeys is now returning at 50% on April 1st. President and CEO Chris Swanger has been working with American and EU leaders, hoping to avoid that.
This industry shouldn't be embroiled in this, and it's going to have a direct impact on the greater hospitality industry. Again, our agriculture partners, for sure. Bars, restaurants.
I'm not knocking it. They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them. nobody can complain about that.
The EU's move comes as liquor stores across Canada have pulled American alcohol from shelves in response to U.S. tariffs on Canadian products. Democratic Congressman Morgan McGarvey is co-chair of the Congressional Bourbon Caucus. He says there seems to be no strategy behind President Trump's tariffs and that they'll hurt everyone with a hand in the bourbon industry.
Everybody from the farmers who put the corn in the ground, to the coopers who put it in the barrel, to the union workers who put it in the bottle, to the people who drive it to the stores.
Spirits Europe, which represents Europe's liquor producers, issued a statement Wednesday saying it was, quote, extremely concerned about the EU's announcement on tariffs and that the tariffs would be, quote, hugely damaging to companies in the U.S. and the EU. In Washington, Erin Kelly, Spectrum News.
Well, a new report from the Commerce Department shows core and overall inflation fell last month, slightly outside of economists' predictions. And core inflation rose by 3%, while core prices were up 2.8%, a cooling in inflation according to the CPI, ultimately. Lowest jump year over year since 2021. But economists are concerned that tariffs might still be a problem when it comes to what we're seeing with inflation. So in other words, this inflation report didn't quite capture what we're seeing with the tariffs. Might be enough for the Federal Reserve not to decrease interest rates. And take a look there. Stock split on the day. More coming up. The LA fires have left us with ruins and debris and, of course, lots of work, but also lots of questions. Some folks are looking for political answers for whom or what institution is to blame, but we know the answer is more holistic and certainly more logistical and scientific than that. A new PBS special called Weathered is asking those questions and speaking to some experts about it. Here's a bit of what it looks like.
This fire is different. I'm Weathered host Maya May, and we're on the ground talking to survivors, first responders, and experts who are living through one of the worst fires in American history to see what happened and how the people of LA are fighting back and adapting to a hotter, drier, and more dangerous reality.
Weathered, Inside the LA Firestorm, premieres Wednesday, March 19th on PBS. And with us now to talk more is the series host and science commuter Maya May and producer and director Trip Jennings. Maya and May, you're a communicator, I should say, not a commuter.
Yeah.
But it's great to have you here in Southern California to talk about this. Congratulations on the special. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We talk about the fact that this Weathered special is part of a series for PBS. So obviously you guys are thinking about this a lot and communicating it around a lot as well. And you also know a lot about fires. So just talk about the overarching vision for what you were trying to accomplish here and what you saw along the way.
Well, the vision for the series is, extreme weather is changing, right? We can see that all over the place, extreme temperatures, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes. And so our show in general takes a scientific look at what's changing, how's it changing, why is it changing, and what can we do to prepare?
Yeah, Maya, talk a little bit about the approach you took with this special, with the sorts of people you were talking to and the questions you were asking.
We just wanted to get our feet on the ground, get in the community, talk to the community members, the survivors, talk to scientists to figure out exactly what was the real cause of this fire and the ramifications of it, insurance-wise, but also, how can people rebuild, but rebuild in the right way?
Yeah, we think about it in terms of contributory negligence, let's just say. There's lots of aspects to this that create this firestorm, but a lot of it is weather, a lot of it is climate, which you know well with this Weathered series. Just talk a little bit about what you learned with respect to that and this fire in particular in Southern California and how it all came together.
Yeah, this fire was the perfect storm. We heard that over and over and over, right? We had 2 wet years, we had 8 very dry months, and then we had Santa Ana winds that happened before the rain came, right? That is the worst case scenario. And we saw it. That was the worst case scenario that we saw. But we're also seeing across the country and all over the world more and more of these urban firestorms. Wildfires moving into communities and ripping through communities. And so that's not just about the weather, it's also about how we build our communities.
And on that note of building communities, something very interesting that y'all talked about here about this period from the 40s and 70s and the weather during that time being particularly wet, which then inspired certain kind of home building, which created these circumstances to some degree.
Yeah. So the early 1900s, we dealt with a lot of wildfire. We saw a lot of what we're seeing today. But then our ocean currents shifted. we moved into this cool, wet period. That's when the fire service was actually started. We talk about this a lot in the special as well. We go back and talk about the history of California and just wildfire in the West and how we got really good at suppressing wildfire. And it was during that time, that cool, wet period, but that also meant that we started to develop in areas where we thought it was okay. I don't know at the time that we saw this shift out of the cool, wet period happening towards the end of the 20th century and in the 21st century. But now we're in this very warm, dry period, and that in a lot of ways is contributing to what we're seeing today.
When you talk about the fire service and also home development, it reminds me of something that I heard from LA County Fire Chief Anthony Maroney, who you speak to as well as a part of your special. And when I was asking him what can we do for the future, he was talking all about home hardening and about this next wave of development has to be resistant to fire. I mean, talk to me about what you heard from Anthony Maroney, but also the way the fire service and the idea of development all sort of comes together.
Talking to Chief Maroney was like the cherry on top for me for that, because his key thing was, we need to add this 5-foot buffer around homes of non-combustible material. So you kind of like move your garden beds away from your house, right? And you have your walkway around the house instead.
Defensible space.
It's defensible space, but it's right next to the home. Home out, rather than your yard in. And that empowers people who live close to other homes to be able to really do something to their house to change the ignitability.
And you talk about empowering people. It's interesting because you spoke to some folks from the community brigade who are feeling somewhat empowered in the firefight now because they can do something, because these fires make people feel so helpless. Talk about just that program and what you heard from speaking to those people.
Yeah, no, the community brigade was interesting, and that's Keegan, the co-founder, Keegan Gibbs. His story is the through line of the special. And he lost his home in the Woolsey fire. And he was one of the residents that I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of residents who feel a lot of anger. It's just like, why did this happen? We need answers. But that anger fueled him and empowered him to want to make a difference and do something about fires and help people to be able to withstand and build more resiliently moving forward. And that's when the community brigade was born, and now they're actually working with fire departments. Chief Maroney said that typically, they would tell them, we don't need you guys here. But now they're so trained up and they're doing amazing work that they're bringing them in and having them help during major firestorms like we saw here last month.
It's a huge deal because we know the personnel was a big part of the conversation, continues to be politically, but as you see these firefighters come from other jurisdictions, every little bit of helps, and also the community feels engaged as well. You both shared moments that resonated in these interviews, but I wonder if I can ask for another one. You already spoke about Maroney and you already spoke about Keegan. What's another moment that you take away from this in terms of where we might be going, or what this special, what it tells you about the future?
Okay, so my nerdy answer is California has always had this weather whiplash, right? Where we go from a few wet years to a dry year, right? And we're not seeing a lot of signal of that changing. There's not a trend in that changing yet. But the models predict that as we move to 2030, 2040, 2050, that we will see a wider swing, more extremes from dry to wet and wet to dry. And that is when we see those fires, when we see really big fire years, when we go from wet to dry. And if that gets more extreme, I'm really worried about what happens in California and all over the West as that changes.
I mean, the wet creates the trees, the dry creates the kindling, and then you have the fires.
Yeah.
I mean, what about you? What did you take from it, Maya?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the Pacific Palisades destruction was awful. But driving through Altadena and knowing what I know about the city and how it has such a rich Black culture, there's a lot of generational wealth in the Black community out there as well. Seeing all of it gone just like that, what is the community gonna look like moving forward? I mean, we spoke with survivors who are like, yeah, I'm gonna try to rebuild, but I don't know if I'm gonna be able to afford insurance moving forward. And that's not just the story for that person. That's gonna be a lot of people's stories. So how can we continue to preserve our identities when things like this happen? Yeah, I think that hit home the most for me.
Yeah, rebuilding in a way that's thoughtful. I mean, we've talked about the wet and the dry, and of course the winds, which is really what made us that we couldn't fight the fires in the first hours of weather of it, but the policy, the insurance, and the community, which it sounds like you all tapped into so well. This has been a really great conversation. Really happy to have you here. Thanks for making this special. Thanks for bringing it here, and congratulations.
Thanks for having us.
I really appreciate it. Weathered Inside the LA Firestorm airs on PBS beginning Wednesday, March 19th. These kinds of conversations we continue having in the rebuild after these fires. We're coming up on Inside the Issue. Stay with us. Let me talk about tariffs, which we are doing increasingly in the last few weeks. We often speak about them in international terms, describing the trade war between the United States and other countries. But now that's trickling down to the local level. Chase Beach brings us that story.
It's the material that keeps the wheels turning at Helen Cycles in Santa Monica, an independent bike shop. Aluminum.
So yeah, this is an aluminum frame.
Aluminum, owner Jay Wolf says, is often used to make bikes because of how affordable, malleable, and lightweight it is.
It's been a staple in the bicycle business for a long time.
And recently, President Donald Trump has made metal his business. On Wednesday, a 25% tariff on all aluminum and steel imported into the U.S. went into effect. Aluminum and steel are used in a wide variety of manufacturing products, from cans to construction to cars and bikes. The Trump administration says tariffs will boost manufacturing in the U.S. Jay says he believes the president's effort is admirable.
I mean, I think the idea is great. It's just probably unrealistic. Our labor costs are so high.
The majority of these bikes come from Cambodia or Taiwan, and Jay says increasing the costs of materials could hurt his business's bottom line. It's a concern companies both in and out of the U.S. are voicing. As Trump's tariffs went into effect Wednesday, Canada and the European Union announced billions of dollars in retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports. Kimberly Adams, senior Washington correspondent with Marketplace, says this could have ripple effects across the economy.
If auto manufacturers have to charge more for their cars because the input costs are more because of the tariffs, that may mean people buy fewer cars and therefore they may want to hire fewer people.
Trump on Wednesday maintaining that tariffs will help the U.S.
The United States of America is going to take back a lot of what was stolen from it by other countries.
At a local BMW dealership, portfolio manager Gary Zubko says he's skeptical. The company has told employees they can expect to see an increase in the cost of the 2 and 3 Series cars seen here because these models are assembled in Mexico and will be subject to the new tariffs.
Prices are going to go up literally 25% on those cars. So you're talking a $45,000 car, add another 10.
But back at Helen Cycles, Jay says he's hopeful this bumpy economic road will start to smooth out. He would just like to see a little more balance.
I think he should come up with a better game plan before initiating these things. It's going to really impact our pocketbooks right away.
A president testing the mettle of business owners across the U.S.
Well, thank you, Chase Beach, for that. And the tariffs are a big part of the global conversation. And as far as we know, there are no U.S. tariffs on shamrocks from Ireland. So there were moments of levity when Ireland's prime minister visited the president at the White House today ahead of St. Patrick's Day celebrations in Washington. That conversation did take on a more serious tone as it evolved, though. They did talk about the escalating trade war between the U.S. and the European Union. Taylor Poplars is at the White House with more.
Ireland's prime minister traditionally pays a visit to the White House ahead of St. Patrick's Day. During Wednesday's trip, President Donald Trump wasted no time bashing the European Union for its trade policies.
The European Union treats us very badly. They have for years.
He also singled out Ireland, which is part of the EU, for attracting U.S. businesses with low tax rates. The comments came hours after the EU announced $28 billion in tariffs on U.S. products if the president keeps in place 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to the U.S. that took effect Wednesday. The president seemed open to negotiating until April 2nd, when he's promised to impose even more tariffs on any country he deems an unfair trading partner.
I'll always have flexibility, but there will be very little flexibility once we start. April 2nd is going to be a very big day for the United States of America.
Democrats on Wednesday bashed the president's tariff policies, which are designed to bring manufacturing jobs to the U.S. but threaten to drive up prices.
Donald Trump's erratic decisions, yes, no, maybe, this country, that country, is creating havoc in the economy.
Although the president criticized Ireland for becoming a hub for pharmaceutical companies, he kept an overall friendly tone with the Prime Minister, Michael Martin. Martin praised Trump for trying to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. He also cautiously talked up that over 700 Irish companies are now based in America.
And I think it's a very good relationship we have. It's a historic one. It's happened over time.
This visit comes as a back and forth continues between the U.S. and Canada over tariffs. Canada on Wednesday announced retaliatory tariffs on nearly $30 billion worth of U.S. imports after Trump's new steel and aluminum tariffs took effect. Reporting at the White House, Taylor Popolars, Spectrum News.
Thank you, Taylor, for that report. Coming up, we're talking about two communities from very different parts of the world coming together for the common cause of rebuilding after the LA fires. Stay with us. The Capitol in D.C. is on edge, a government shutdown possible as early as Friday midnight, with both Republicans and Democrats divided over how long the federal government should be funded and how. At the center of the debate is the U.S. DOJ service, along with disaster relief for the recent L.A. fires. Cassie Simeon takes us into the details.
I'm worried that the Senate will just roll over. I hope that's not the case.
Strong words from a House Democrat about his Senate colleagues after House Republicans Tuesday muscled through a spending plan to keep the government open. It's now up to the Senate whether to send the legislation to the White House. At least 8 Democratic senators must vote yes for that to happen. Republicans are placing the responsibility of keeping the government open on them.
If the Democrats want to shut the government down, then let them shut the government down. This can be a Schumer shutdown. That's up to them.
The bill largely maintains spending at current levels, except for a $6 billion increase for the Pentagon and a $13 billion cut in domestic spending. However, all but one Democrat in the House voted no because the bill would do nothing to rein in President Donald Trump and his ally, Elon Musk, from continuing to slash spending across federal agencies. Democrats in the House said Senate Democrats must hold the line.
It's an awful bill. It's going to hurt my constituents. It's going to hurt California. It doesn't have a dime of money for fire relief in it. I would expect Democrats in the Senate to do what Democrats in the House did and show a united front and reject this terrible bill.
Hopefully they understand the CR gives carte blanche to DOJ, to the administration, to keep working, through Elon Musk to cut whatever they want.
Both California Senators, Democrats Alex Padilla and Adam Schiff, said they will not support the bill, but at least one Democrat has said he will support the measure.
If you don't want to vote for that CR because you want to protect the government and some of the things that I don't agree with that are happening, well then again, it's like I'm not going to cut the baby in half.
As for Republicans placing preemptive blame of a shutdown on Democrats, Congresswoman Laura Friedman fired back.
The Republicans control the executive branch. The Republicans control Congress. Any shutdown is on them because they were unwilling to come to the table and in good faith negotiate a bipartisan spending deal.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer announced Wednesday afternoon not enough Senate Democrats would back the Republican measure, saying Republicans should consider a shorter Democratic-led stopgap measure instead. With the House out of session, a government shutdown could be imminent if the Senate cannot reach some sort of deal.
All right, thank you, Cassie. Yeah, to recap, it's a stopgap that the House passed that Senate has to decide, and Democrats are saying we got to talk about the big one and the fact that there is no aid for the California fires. And when you think about what we're experiencing after the fires, it's about aid. It's also about insurance. And today, California Senate Insurance Committee met with lawmakers hearing from officials or hearing from consumer advocates, also from stakeholders of the insurance industry. A huge conversation about the insurers that are leaving or people being underinsured. What can legislators do to fix the insurance market in California? Elected officials in California have been hearing the call from the public, and they've been talking about addressing premiums and beyond. That's what that meeting was about today, and we will continue to keep you posted on that. Folks are looking into rebuilding. Insurance would help, but even without support from government agencies, they're doing what they can to move forward after the fires. And this week, 2 communities from different parts of the world came together to give some support, also provide some lessons when it comes to rebuilding. Both these groups know rebuilding well. One group was from Paradise, devastated by the campfire 5 years ago. The other from Ukraine, 3 years into its war with Russia. Jimmy Kennedy takes us there.
We're here to help you for the long haul. I can speak for everyone.
These types of words are heartwarming, says Yulia Golivanova, who is from occupied Lugansk in Ukraine. She and other Ukrainian local government workers are visiting Paradise to learn about rebuilding and resilience from those who had to start over after the devastating 2018 campfire. The high level of destruction, something Yulia says she can relate to. The people of my county have sustained a lot of devastation and destruction. Paradise and the community of Paradise have been in a similar situation for a different reason, so it's really interesting to me how the community got together. The town of Paradise lost around 14,000 homes and many more structures, along with 85 lives. Yulia says similarly, her county has lost almost all buildings and homes, and everyone who lived there has been displaced. She says it's been insightful hearing about grassroots efforts. The way how the people of Paradise work together, how they started their initiatives, how they started their collaboration. The group's visit, an initiative of Rotary International, who put out a call for resiliency and rebuilding programs, which the Paradise Rotary Club answered. Co-president Sonny Ventimiglia says they are happy to speak with anyone in such a situation. He says coming together in community groups to understand the needs of those rebuilding and then working with various entities to get those needs met is a large part of the information sharing during the group's visit.
There was a 10% of the homes that remained. And a logistical challenge they had was, how do you get water back to the homes that are still there when the majority of homes around them are destroyed? Therefore, the water system is destroyed.
With news of a ceasefire, Yulia says due to their history with Russia, she can only be cautiously optimistic. We are certainly optimistic to an extent. Russia have a history of breaking ceasefires. What Yulia says gives her the most hope is knowing they have support from people who care, such as she experienced speaking with local school kids in Paradise. We got the chance to meet with some school children, and the advice was stay strong, stay together, be friendly, and that was so touching that pretty much all of our group had tears in their eyes like I have right now. Words Yulia says she can't express enough of how thankful she is to the people of Paradise, along with the support organisations in the US have given and continues to give.
Pooling information is intrinsic to community. In that way, those communities became one. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your communities, click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV for the latest information, balanced coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.